Ambassador Xylos pressed his 4 primary sensory stalks against the cool, polished obsidian table. A faint tremor ran through the room, a distant echo of battle. The holoprojector shimmered, showing jagged lines of light. They marked the edges of the disputed Vashan territories. These lines now pulsed with aggressive red and stubborn blue. The red was the Vorlag Empire. The blue, impossibly, was humanity. Xylos's primary ocular cluster narrowed. "It makes no sense," he hissed, his voice a low rumble through his vocal sacs. "Zero strategic value. The Vashan possess no rare elements. Their systems are not choke points. Their technology is primitive. Yet, the humans commit their entire third fleet." He shifted, his many legs rustling softly on the woven floor mat. "They commit more resources than they would for a core world. Why?" His aide, a younger Cathar named Tanar, shifted uncomfortably on his own 6 legs. "Sir, our intelligence suggests it is, for an ancient favor. A debt." Xylos rotated his upper torso, one stalk twitching in irritation. "A debt? Of what kind? We have analyzed their economic reports. There is no monetary exchange, no long-term trade agreements with the Vashan, no resource extraction. This is illogical. Purely illogical." Far from the hushed halls of the Cathar Galactic Council, Commander Eris Thorn stood on the bridge of the Human Alliance dreadnought, the Indomitable. The view screen displayed the vibrant, swirling gas giant of Vashan Prime. Smaller, brighter pinpricks of light were the Vorlag assault ships, a swarm descending upon the Vashan's orbiting defenses. The Vashan ships, small and fragile, were already breaking formation. "Report," Thorn said, his voice calm, even though a low thrumming vibration ran through the deck plates from distant explosions. Lieutenant Jin, a young officer with bright, focused eyes, looked up from her console. Her fingers danced across the holographic interface. "Sir, Vorlag Advance Fleet is engaging Vashan Perimeter Defense Grid 2. Grid 1 has fallen. Vashan casualties are mounting rapidly. They are not equipped for this kind of aggression." Thorn nodded slowly. He could almost smell the faint metallic scent of stress circuitry in the air. A faint klaxon sounded, a distant muffled alarm from lower decks. It spoke of damage being sustained somewhere on the Indomitables or a nearby ship. He ignored it for now. "Send the Protector and the Vanguard to reinforce Grid 2. Prioritize civilian vessel evacuation routes. Get those transports out first. Use our shields to cover their retreat." Jin hesitated for a bare second. "Sir, that exposes the Protector and Vanguard flanks to the main Vorlag assault. Their armor is not rated for sustained direct engagement with Vorlag dreadnoughts." Thorn turned his gaze to Jin, his eyes unwavering. "Lieutenant, we are here to protect the Vashan, not to fight a clean war. We accepted this debt. Now we pay it. Every single Vorlag projectile aimed at a Vashan transport is one less aimed at our own people later. Do it." Jin's face hardened with resolve. "Yes, sir. Executing orders." Her fingers flew across the console. The ship's comms crackled with orders being relayed. On Vashan Prime, Elder Lyra, her skin a soft dappled green, huddled in the deep earthen shelter with her people. The rhythmic booming from above, once a distant thunder, now shook the very ground beneath them. Dust rained down from the ceiling of the cavern. Small Vashan children cried softly, their large, luminous eyes wide with terror. Lyra held a young one close, stroking its smooth, cool scalp. "It will be all right, little one," she whispered, her voice raspy with fear but firm. "The Sky People are here. The humans are here." Another, louder boom made the ground shudder violently. A faint, almost imperceptible high-pitched whine followed. It was the sound of something tearing through the atmosphere. The Vashan had never known war on this scale. Their history was one of quiet growth, of nurturing their forest worlds, of simple trading. They lived by an ancient creed of hospitality and quiet service. They had always offered water to the thirsty, shelter to the lost. It was just how they were. Now, their gentle world was being torn apart. Back on the Indomitable, hours later, the initial Vorlag push had been blunted. The air on the bridge now carried the faint, acrid smell of plasma residue, even though the main engagements were distant. The Protector and Vanguard had sustained heavy damage. their energy shields flickering visibly on the external displays. But dozens of Vashan transports, heavily laden with civilians, were now clear of the immediate combat zone. Lieutenant Jin watched the retreating ships, a knot of unease still in her stomach. "Commander," she said, her voice lower now, almost a murmur, "we lost 8,000 personnel in that first wave, for a species that offered water to one of our scouts centuries ago. Is this truly a justified expenditure of human lives?" Thorn was observing the Vorlag movements on the main screen, his back to her. He didn't turn. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice even, "when Captain Vance's scout ship, the Wayfarer, crash-landed on Vashan 1, he was near death, dehydrated, injured. The Vashan found him. They didn't know what he was. A strange, hairless creature from beyond the stars. They offered him water from their sacred springs. They shared their food. They gave him shelter in their communal dwellings for 3 cycles. They healed his wounds with their native herbs. They asked for nothing in return. They simply helped. He was the first human to ever meet an alien species in person, light years from Earth. And they treated him with profound kindness." Thorn finally turned, his gaze sweeping over the bridge crew, then settling on Jin. "That debt isn't just to Captain Vance, it's to all of humanity. It set a precedent. It told us the galaxy wasn't just a place of monsters. It showed us there was kindness. We wouldn't be where we are today without that small act. We do not forget. Not kindness. Not betrayal." Jin looked at the floor, a new understanding beginning to dawn on her. The cost seemed less abstract now, more tied to a foundational human principle. Ambassador Xylos, meanwhile, had called an emergency session of the Cathar Galactic Council. The holoprojector now showed not just the battle lines, but projected human casualty figures. They were astronomical. The Vorlag, represented by the hulking, armored figure of High Commander Zarth, scoffed through his translator. "They are fools," Zarth rumbled, his multiple eyes gleaming with contempt. "They bleed themselves for nothing. They fight a ghost. Their illogical commitment will be their downfall. We will simply outlast them." Xylos, however, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the coldness of the projection. He had assigned historian Kazar, one of the foremost Kazar archivists, to delve into human historical data. Kazar's reports had been baffling. Scattered references to ancient debts, honored kindnesses, and a human concept called paying it forward. Kazar now stood before the council, a stack of data slates clutched in his forelimbs. "Esteemed counselors," Kazar began, his voice a dry whisper, "my research suggests this human commitment is not unique. They have a documented history of disproportionate response to both perceived slights and ancient favors. There is a curious narrative of a conflict 100 cycles ago, where they committed an entire fleet to recover a stolen ceremonial artifact for a minor species. An artifact with no intrinsic value, but profound cultural significance to that species." Zarth snorted. "Sentimental primitives. What does a bauble matter against true power?" Xylos ignored Zarth. He turned his attention to Kazar. "What of this Wayfarer incident? The Vashan hospitality?" Kazar nodded. "Yes, Ambassador. The data is fragmented but consistent. Captain Vance's logs, we covered years later, speak of the Vashan's unprompted kindness. This event is taught in their primary schools, often cited as the first contact of kindness. It appears to be a deeply ingrained part of their collective memory, a core value. Days turned into weeks. The conflict raged. Humanity's Third Fleet, though taking losses, showed no sign of faltering. Their defense of the Vashan was absolute. They did not just hold the line, they systematically began to dismantle the Vorlag invasion. Human pilots, despite the overwhelming odds, executed impossible maneuvers, shielding Vashan civilian enclaves with their own ships. Human ground forces, deployed to Vashin Prime, engaged Vorlag armored divisions in dense forests. They used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps, using ambushes, and adapting to the Vashin environment with surprising speed. They were lean, efficient, and utterly ruthless against the Vorlag. Yet when they encountered Vashan civilians, their demeanor shifted to one of quiet protection. Commander Thorn oversaw it all from the Indomitable's bridge. He ordered the deployment of Arbiter-class stealth frigates, small, fast vessels that could slip past Vorlag defenses. Their mission? To evacuate the remaining Vashan historical archives from the core capital before the Vorlag could reach it. This wasn't about military victory. This was about saving an entire culture. The air on the bridge was now thick with the scent of human sweat, recycled air, and the constant hum of active systems. The crew were exhausted, their faces etched with fatigue, but their eyes held a stubborn light. Thorn allowed himself a brief, small smile. He watched a feed of a human soldier sharing his combat rations, a protein bar, with a small Vashan child. The Vashan child, once terrified, cautiously took the offering. This was the true strength he knew. Lieutenant Jin had been assigned to coordinate ground operations from orbit. She saw the detailed reports, the raw footage. One particular recording stuck with her. A human medical team, under heavy fire, refusing to abandon a group of injured Vashan. They erected a portable shield, treated wounds, and then systematically extracted them while providing suppressing fire. It was slow, dangerous, and militarily inefficient by most standards. But they did it. "Commander," Jin said to Thorn one cycle, her voice tinged with a new understanding, "I think I get it now. It's not just about Captain Vance. It's about who we are, what kind of species we want to be in the galaxy." Thorn, who had been studying a holographic star chart, simply nodded. "Precisely, Lieutenant. The galaxy is vast. It is filled with predators and opportunists. But it also holds wonders. If we only fight for profit or strategic gain, we become just another predator. If we fight for principle, for kindness, for a debt long unpaid, we show them something different. We show them humanity." He paused, then chuckled softly. "And sometimes, showing them something different is the most terrifying weapon of all." The bridge crew, though weary, shared a collective, tired grin. The humor was a necessary balm against the constant pressure. On the Cathar Council, historian Kesar presented more findings. He had uncovered evidence of a series of cultural exchange programs initiated by humanity centuries ago, long before their military power was fully realized. These programs were not about espionage or resource mapping, but simply about understanding other species. They sent envoys with no ulterior motives, Kesar explained, his voice filled with a tremor of disbelief. They simply wished to learn. And in many cases, they offered their own knowledge and resources freely, without asking for anything in return. Ambassador Xylos paced his chamber after the council meeting, his sensory stalks twitching. "They are not just illogical," he muttered to himself. "They are unquantifiable. Their motivations defy our strategic models. A species that remembers a single act of unsolicited kindness for centuries? A species that will commit vast resources to defend it? What else do they remember? What other debts do they carry?" A new fear began to settle in Xylos's multi-chambered heart. It was not just the fear of humanity's power. It was the fear of their unpredictable principles. High Commander Zarth of the Vorlag Empire, however, remained arrogant. "Their sentimentality is a weakness," he roared to his war council. "We will crush them. We will show them that power, not principle, rules the stars." He ordered a massive counteroffensive. Vorlag dreadnoughts, reinforced with new generation weapon systems, launched a full-scale assault on the human defensive perimeter. The battle that followed was brutal. The Indomitable shook violently under sustained fire. Alarms blared continuously. Commander Thorn, his face grim but determined, moved calmly amongst his bridge crew, issuing orders, offering quiet words of encouragement. The smell of burning insulation filled the air. "Brace for impact," shouted a communications officer, just before a massive shockwave rattled the ship, throwing several crew members off their feet. Thorn held fast to his command chair. "Damage report," he barked. "Shields at 30%. Jin shouted back, her voice strained. "Hull breach on deck. 3. Fire teams inbound." But humanity was not just about brute force. They were also about cunning. As the Vorlag poured their forces into the direct engagement, Thorn unleashed a hidden element. Human long-range bombardment platforms, disguised as asteroid fragments, uncloaked behind the main Vorlag fleet. They had been slowly, painstakingly positioned over weeks, moving at sublight speeds to avoid detection. "Fire at will," Thorn commanded, his voice a low growl. The Indomitable's main guns, despite the damage, unleashed their own volley. Thousands of brilliant energy bolts lanced through space. The Vorlag, focused on the front, were caught completely by surprise. Their rear lines, unshielded, exploded in a cascade of brilliant fire. Zarth's voice, crackling over encrypted channels, was suddenly filled with an uncharacteristic rage and confusion. Where did that come from? They had no such assets. Thorn allowed himself a grim smile. "Lieutenant Jin, send a coded message to the Vorlag High Command. Tell them humanity does not just remember debts. We also remember lessons." The subtext was clear. Humanity had learned from past conflicts. They had adapted. The surprise attack broke the Vorlag's morale. Their highly structured, predictable command system faltered under the unexpected blow. Ships broke formation. Communications became chaotic. High Commander Zarth, unaccustomed to such tactical deception from a species he deems sentimental, made critical errors. The human forces, battered but unbowed, pressed their advantage. They had not just survived the assault, they had turned it into an opportunity. On Vashan Prime, the ground battles also turned. Human soldiers, aided by the Vashans' detailed knowledge of their forest homes, led the Vorlag into a series of devastating ambushes. The Vorlag, used to open field engagements, were disoriented in the dense, bioluminescent forests. The air filled with the cries of Vorlag soldiers trapped in cleverly laid snares and nets, followed by the precise, efficient work of human combat teams. The Vashan, witnessing this display of fierce loyalty, began to shed their deep-seated fear. They brought the human soldiers food and water. They tended to their wounds, just as their ancestors had done for Captain Vance. The debt was being repaid, and in its repayment, a new, stronger bond was being forged. Elder Lyra, now safe in a human-protected sector, watched the human soldiers move among her people. She saw their quiet determination, their focused eyes, the way they moved with precision but also with a surprising gentleness when interacting with the Vashan. She approached a human soldier, a burly male with a kind face who was helping a Vashan family move supplies. We do not understand," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Why do you do this? We are small. We are not strong like you. We offered so little." The soldier, whose name was Sergeant Miller, paused. He looked at the elder, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Elder," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "you offered us everything when we had nothing. You offered hope. You reminded us what it means to be good. That's not a small thing, that's everything." He then turned back to his task, effortlessly lifting a heavy crate. Lyra watched him, a profound sense of gratitude, mixed with awe, washing over her. The Vorlag Empire, bleeding resources and losing face, finally called for a ceasefire. High Commander Zarth, his pride shattered, had been forced to admit defeat. He sent a single, terse message to the human alliance. "We do not understand your motives, but we acknowledge your victory." Ambassador Xylos received the news on the Cathar Council. He had expected a Pyrrhic victory, a long, drawn-out war of attrition. He had not expected such a decisive, even humiliating defeat for the Vorlag. The silence in the council chamber was profound. Then, Xylos stood. His many limbs were straight, his posture rigid. "Counselors," he said, his voice now devoid of any irritation, filled instead with a weighty realization, "we have misjudged humanity. We viewed their actions through the lens of strategic gain, of resource acquisition, of territorial expansion, but their motivations are different." He paused, turning to face the holographic projection of the Vashan system, now once again peaceful, but with human ships still silently patrolling its borders. They do not fight for profit alone. They fight for their friends. They fight for an ancient kindness. This is a species that remembers a cup of water for centuries. Imagine what else they remember. A shiver ran through the assembled council members. The unpredictable nature of humanity, their deep-seated sense of loyalty and debt, was far more terrifying than any weapon. Lieutenant Jin stood on the Indomitable's bridge, watching the last of the Vorlag ships retreat. The air was still thick with the residual scent of plasma, but the alarms had quieted. Repairs were underway. The Vashin system was safe. Commander Thorne stood beside her. "We did it, sir," Jin said, her voice filled with a quiet pride. "We saved them." Thorne nodded. "Indeed, Lieutenant, and in doing so, we reminded the galaxy of who we are." He looked out at the peaceful Vashin system. The cost was high, but the cost of forgetting who we are would have been higher. He then turned to Jin, a flicker of humor in his eyes. "Besides, think of all the future opportunities for unexpected karma. Who knows who else we might have given a cup of water to along the way?" Jin chuckled, a genuine warm sound. "I suppose it's a good thing we keep meticulous historical records then, sir." Thorne's smile widened. "Always, Lieutenant. Always." The Indomitable began its slow, majestic turn, preparing for its long journey home. Its hull bore the scars of battle, but it carried the quiet triumph of a debt honored, a principle upheld, and a galactic perception forever changed. Humanity had proven they were a force to be reckoned with, not just for their power, but for their unwavering, sometimes baffling loyalty. And the galaxy, for the first time, truly understood that humanity never forgets a favor. They learned that a simple act of kindness could ripple across centuries and ignite a galactic war, and they learned to be very, very careful about what they offered or withheld from a stranded human. The lesson was clear. Humanity always pays its debts, in full and with interest. The stars, once seen as cold and indifferent, now seemed to hold a new, more complex warmth, and a subtle, enduring promise of unexpected karma.